Kadosh Boker or Daf Yomi Masechet Batra Daf Samechet Mudalev 68a1. Says the Gemara, we are a few lines down where it says Hahu Damarle Lechavre Betabadu. That's like 4 lines down from the top. Hahu Damarle Lechavre. Somebody comes and he tells his friends, Betabadu Chol Tashmisha V'ani Mochelecha. I'm going to sell you my oil press plus all its functions, right? All its tashmishim, all its accessories. Thank you. That's a better word. Havianahu Chanvata Brai. So now if there's going to be some type of stores outside of this oil press that they would sell, whether it's going to be the oil, let's say the wine and bread and other things, now not only that, they would put shumshamim, which is basically like sesame seeds, in order to dry them up, right? But again, the ikar was to really be'emet, was to sell other things, but they would also use it. So Atal the Rav Yosef, they came in front of Yosef, Amarle, and he told him, Tanina, we learned, if he said, if he said, I'm selling you the bathhouse and all its accessories, everything's sold. So the same thing. Here, the second that he says, everything's going to be sold. Even these stores, even though they cut out the stores, meaning the main function of the stores was to sell other things. But the fact that it also has to do with this betabad, it's also going to be sold. So Abai is going to ask, you have stores that they're selling wine, bread, and other things, but they're attached to this betabad, meaning you have the oil press, right? But the oil press is going to be attached to stores around there, but there is a minor function of these stores that they also do things of the oil press. So he says, the second that he said all accessories, it includes that, even though it's not the main function. So Abai is going to ask, Elmaleh, Abai comes and he asks, Rabbi says, he says, what are you talking about? We said beta merchatz, beta bad. He says, not everything is going to be sold with it, right? Only not anything else. Meaning, right, the fact that these stores are not designated for the oil press, so therefore it's not going to be sold with it. If it was only selling oil, so listen, I understand. It's like an accessory. You make the oil and you sell it in one of these stores. I can understand. But here, it's not the main function. So Ravashi says, Chazina, we're going to see, if he said, and these are the matzrana, which means these are the stores beside it, Kani is going to acquire it. But if not, then meaning that he had to specify that he's also selling these type of stores as well. If he didn't specify that he's selling the stores are not going to be sold. Okay. Mishnah Samechet Mudale, 68a, the Mishnah. If you sell a city, so you sold the houses inside of the city, right? And he says also, remember, borot shechir marot are different types of pits where they used to store water, just like differences. You know, a board is just again, is it going to be like a square one? Is it going to be like more of a cave? Did they put like plaster it in? All those things. So one more time, you sold the city. It includes everything inside of it. What does it mean, everything? It includes houses. It includes different types of pits for water. It includes bathhouses. It includes chicken coops, and it's going to include.
Which is not normally the case on other things.
Exactly, but this includes all these things, or oil presses, or also like fields which are irrigated. But anything which is movable in the city, you do not acquire. But if he told him which is basically I'm selling it as is, which means the way that the city is with everything inside of it, even if there was an animal or slaves inside the city, kula muchadim, everything's going to be sold with the city. Okay? Rashba Gomer, Rav Hashem Gamliel comes and he says, if you sold the city, you sold the santer. The Gemara is going to explain what is this santer exactly. Right? But what does it mean? You're like, well, what's a machlok? What's he adding? So let's see the Gemara. Says the Gemara, Amale Ravacha bere de Rav Avya le Ravashi. Says Ravacha bere de Rav Avya to Rav Ashi. Yeah, he comes and he says the following. Shema Mina, we learn from here. Avda ki metaltali dami. That an eved is like metaltali. What does that mean? If you just told me now that we're talking about metaltali, and then we said that you even sold the animal and slave, so that means a slave is a metaltali. But if you're going to tell me a slave is not metaltali, what are you telling me then that even if there was an animal or a slave inside, it's going to be sold? When you're right, if you said the city and everything which is inside the city. So you see from here that an aved is like metaltali. But if you're going to tell me it's like karka, so you just said if you sold the city, so you sold the entire, so then everything's included then. So what's going on? Yeah. So obviously, right, everything has to be included in such a case. Okay, that's what he's saying. Fine. So says the Gemara, velamai, but rather, avda kemetaltaledami. So obviously the eved has to be like metaltalim. So he says, my afilu. So what does it mean then? Even. If you're going to tell me even an animal and a slave is going to be sold, it's metaltalim. You just give me a general rule. The general rule is anything to do with karka is going to be sold to the city. Everything which is metaltalim, which is a movable object, is not going to be sold to the city. So what do you do? Even an animal and that's metaltalim. You just sold it to me. So he says, there's going to be a difference between metaltalim which are move on their own and metaltalim which don't move on their own. Meaning, certain metaltalim, let's say a chair. A chair is a movable object, but it doesn't move on its own. You have to move it. An animal or a slave, it moves on its own. So even though it is metaltalim, it's a movable object, but it moves on its own. So even if you're going to tell me that an eved is like mekarka, there's also a difference in karka. There's a piece of land which is movable, which that's like an eved, right? That means even though he's considered like land, but it's movable. And then you have a piece of land which is not movable, which is your regular real estate. You cannot move, right? The piece of land. Fine. The two dots says, Rashba Gomer says, if you sell the city, you also sold the santer. What is the santer exactly? My santer. So Hacha Targimu here we translate it as Bar Machvanita. It's an eved, which is it's a slave which is appointed on the surveys. Thank you. On the surveys of the city. Meaning he's like the guy, I don't know how you could say if there's somebody special.
Town clerk.
Town clerk. Okay, so that's what it is. A town clerk. Meaning he knows exactly where the boundaries of every single property. Right? That's what it is. Shimon ben Avtulmos Omer Bage. Right? Really, Bemet, it's not a human being. These are the fields which surround the city. Meaning there's going to be certain fields which surround the city. So these are included, right? When you come and you're going to sell the city, these are included as well. So Mandamar Bar Menchvanata, the one that says that it's town clerk, Kol Sheken, that it's going to include the cities, the fields that surround the city. But according to the Mandamar, that it's the fields that surround the city, but the town clerk, he didn't sell. Why? Because it's a human being. It's a move. It's not there. It's nothing to do with it. Fine. So now we learned to the Mishnah. Beta Badim et Beta Shlachim. We said that if you sold the city, it includes oil presses and fields which need a lot of irrigation. Correct? How does it literally translate Beta Shlachim? The Gemara is going to explain, but okay, fine. Okay, we'll see in the Gemara. Bage. What is Bage? He says these are the fields, right, around the city, and these are called the Beta Shlachim. Why? Because they need a lot of rain. The Ichtiv, as it says, V'sholech mayim al penei chutzot. What does that mean? You're going to send water on the outskirts. So what does that mean? Bishma, I understand the Mandamar Bar Mechvinita that he says that it's going to be a town clerk. Amar Tanakama Baga Mizdamene, that's why the Tanakama comes and he says that you're going to sell these fields. But Bar Mechvinata lo Mizdamene, you're not going to sell the town clerk. And comes Rashbag and he says, no, even the town clerk, it's going to be included. Right? But according to the Mandamar Bage, which means that we're talking about the Bage is, right, the fields which are on the outside. So Tanakama and Amiach, so he also included it then. So what's going on then? One more time. If we're translating the word beta shlachim to the fields around the thing, which is called bage, that's the terminology. Okay, fine. Bage, that's what's written in Aramaic. Bage. Okay, so those are the fields around. Now, what do we say at the beginning of the Mishnah? If you sold the city, you sold the houses, the different pits, the bathhouses, the chicken coops, and the oil presses, and the fields surrounding the city, because those are the beta shlachim. So now, 2 minutes later, comes Rashbag. And Rashbag comes and he says, by the way, when you sell a city, you also sell the santer. What is the santer?
Must be the field.
No,
But saying it again, we already said it.
Exactly. If you're going to tell me then that the santer is going to be the town clerk, so it makes sense. But if you're going to tell me it's a field, you already told me that it's a field. So what's going on? So says the Gemara, Mi savrat my shlachin baged. Do you really think that the beta shlachin means the fields around the city? No, for sure not. My shlachim kinunyata. We're talking about the gardens, which they make different types of things in, which is samuch la'id, and those are called the beta shlachim. Shneimar shelachayich pardes rimonim. The shlachim is like shelachayich, right? It's the same word, which means I'm sending things, which are pardes rimonim, which is like the orchards and all those things. Bage lo mistabne. But the fields, no, meaning when we said the fields around the city, we're not talking about regular fields. We're only talking about the gardens, which you grow things, which are right on the outskirts of it. That, yes. And that's what's called the Bet HaShachim. But fields around, we never spoke about that. So the Shbag comes and he says, Senter, even the fields around. Meaning now we could say that it's the fields around because the Bet HaShachim was not the fields around. The Bet HaShachim in the former part of the Mishnah was referring to the gardens which are surrounding the city. Those are sold. And that's a Mishnah. But not the fields. And the Shbag comes and he adds even the fields. So now it could also be a town clerk or the fields, and it's okay. Because it could be or. Yeah, it could be or. Ika de Amre. There are those that say. So now the Gemara says like this. Ika de Amre, there are those that say Savrua. They thought, what is the Shlachim? Ginunyata. We're talking about the gardens around the fields. So Bishop al-Mandamar Bage, it's good according to the Mandamar that says the Santar is a Bage. So Tarakama comes and he says that you're going to sell the gardens, but the fields you're not going to sell. And Ashbak comes in and says that you're also going to sell the fields surrounding it, right? Masechet 68b. But according to the Mandamar Bar Mechavniata that we're talking about, the town clerk, Tanakama comes and he says, you're going to sell the fields, the gardens around, and comes Rashbag and he speaks about the town clerk. What's the connection?
Meaning, you're actually selling a person who's a clerk.
So the Gemara says, according to the Mandamar that we're talking about the town clerk, so then the Tanakama comes and he's talking about a garden, and now what? Rashbag is going to speak about the town clerk. What's the connection between them? So the Gemara says, Mi Sabra, do you think that the Shlachin is going to be a garden? No, what is it? My Shlachin, Bagi, it's the fields. And as it says, but the town clerk is not going to be sold. And Rashbag comes and he says, no, even the town clerk is going to be sold. So again, basically, according to the second version, remember, Nika Damre is always a second version. So according to the second version, we're completely changing, right? What exactly is the Bet HaShachim? At the beginning, according to this version, we thought it was a garden, and now we're changing it to the fields. Okay? Tashema. So let's really be man. What is a Santer? So remember, Tashema is always, we're going to try to come in proof. We're going to try to bring a proof. What is this Santer? So Rabbi Yehuda comes and he says, Santer and Umachur, when you come and you sell a Santer, when you sell the city, you did not sell the Santer, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Remember, Rashbag in the Mishnah said, yes, in the Mishnah. But Rabbi Yehuda comes and he says, no. But on Kulmos, which is basically the scribe of the king, that he has to sell, he's like the town scribe, where he's the one that does the titles. The titles. I don't know if there's a word for that in English. A guy that's in charge of the titles. Who is the one that belongs to every single person, the houses and all those things? Machur is going to be sold. My lover, we're not talking about Midan Kulmus Kavra Santer Nami Gavra. He says, one second, if the Ankulmus is a human being, so the Santer should also be a human being. Meaning it's only logical to say that they're two different human beings. One of them was the one that's in charge of knowing the town boundaries. Meaning this house, boundary here. But you're going to ask the guy, who does it belong to? I have no idea. Why? It was not my job. The other guy was the one that was in charge of who does each thing belong to. You know, there was a famous story about the Jews that they worked in the post office and they had like all the things of where did all the houses belong to, right, in certain areas of Europe before the war. And then after the war broke out, people just came and they just took everything, and there was a lot of balagan. So says the Gemara, okay, Tashema, right? So we're going to say that if you're going to tell me that the Kulmus is a human being, so Santa should also be a human being. So Midi, can you compare both cases? It says Hakirita, two different concepts. If you learn it together, that if you sold one, you sold the other, you're probably correct. Meaning that if one's a human being, the other one's a human being. But if I teach it separately, and I come in and tell you, Richard, if you sold the city, you did not sell the Santer. Or if you sold the city, you did sell the Ankulmus or whatever it was. You understand? There, if I teach it to you separately, it could be that one of them is a human being and one of them is a field, or the fields around the area. Because I didn't teach it together. If it's together and I tell you, if you sold A, you didn't sell B, you're probably right. They're both human beings. The fact that A is a human being, B is probably. But if I teach it separately, you sell the city, you sold this. If you sell this, you didn't sell that. But I didn't teach it together. So then no, one of them could be Bemet, and it's not a human being. So says the Gemara, can you say that? The Seifa said, if you didn't sell the outskirts of the city, or not the kfarim, which are the villages beside it, or the chorashim, which are the forests beside the city. Velo muktzin, or not the mizumanim to serve it, right? Velo bevarim shechayav, or not all these traps of whether it's for the fish or for the birds. And what is sheyarea? Bizle. What is bizle? Amrav Baba, piske bage. We're talking about the fields around the city. Piske bage do mazamne. He says these are the chatichot bika, which is like a pasek. But the fields in itself, it is. Meaning he wants to say that there are certain pieces of wood, right? Of which is meaning like it's a part of the valley, which is how do you call this? Beside the city. But they're separated by other fields. Okay, so he comes and he says why?
Separated by like
rocky things, meaning that there's a separation, there's a pasek there. Okay, so he comes and he says those are not going to be sold, but the actual fields themselves, they are going to be sold. So says Igmana, you're right. Epuch, I have to switch it. Rabbi Yehuda comes and he says that the santer is going to be sold, just like our Mishnah, and then kulmus is not going to be sold. Okay, so says Igmana, can you actually say that? He says, right? Amar Rabbi Yehuda comes and he says like there's Rashbag Svileh. But Rabbi Yehuda, he was like Rabbanan, not like Rashbag. Remember, who was the one in our Mishnah that said that if you sold the city, you sold the santer? Rashbag. So what? Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rashbag. Rabbi Yehuda holds like Chachamim, like the rabbis. He said, yes, you did sell the city and the villages and all these things. Titania was went to the right. Rashbag says, you did sell the villages beside it. So says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda, no. Rabbi Yehuda, he holds like Rashbag in one halacha to do with the santer, but he argues in Rashbag on to do with the villages beside it, which is benotea. Okay? 2 dots. Fine. So you're not going to sell. We're talking about now the bevarim, which are these are the cages or the traps of whether it's talking about the birds or the fish and all these things. So meaning we have a contradiction. Hayula banot. What happens if you have the villages? Enim karotimad, it's not going to be sold with it. If it had a certain part, right, which is going to be called in it in the sea, meaning it had a city, right, which was in the sea, which is actually called for it. So the yabasha, and part of it in the yabasha, it is going to be sold. Meaning, what happens sometimes? You have Greece or other where they have like a how do you call it? They have an island which is called after it, which means that it's actually big. Nowadays they were conquered, so you go to all these little islands. Right underneath America, some of them is going to be one of them is British, one of them is going to be French, one is going to be whatever, American.
Gibraltar,
right? Well, Gibraltar is not really an island. Gibraltar is actually Gibraltar is a peninsula. It's actually attached to Spain.
Okay.
It's attached to Spain. It's just there's water on the other 2 sides, but it's actually 100% attached to Spain. It's not like there's a bridge.
How did Spain lose it then?
Because when they says the Gemara la kasha, it's not a question. Right, right, he comes and he says, the brighter that's talking about the bevarim, which are going to be sold with the cities, he comes and he says, right, we're the bevarim, not varim, right, which are going to be sold with the cities. We're talking about that they're open, right, within the city. But if they're going to be open outside, so then no. But not the different types of forests that are there, which are open towards it. Okay, fine. We're going to stop here.